The moment the divorce papers from my husband arrived, I fired my brother-in-law from his management position at my company. My mother-in-law and husband were hysterical. Why would you fire your high-achieving brother? They demanded. I just laughed and told them he wasn't my family anymore. I would make them regret ever betraying me. The morning air in the CEO's office was quiet, yet heavy with the weight of a towering workload. Eleanor sat upright behind her massive mahogany desk, meticulously reviewing the monthly financial reports. Her hand moved swiftly, turning each page, while her eyes scanned the columns of figures with intense precision. As the founder and leader of the company, Eleanor was accustomed to immense pressure. She had built this business from the ground up through sheer grit, sacrificing rest, energy, and her entire focus. In the midst of analyzing the month's profit margins, there was a soft knock on her door. Her assistant entered, carrying a thick manila envelope. The assistant placed it carefully on Eleanor's desk, explaining that a process server had just delivered it specifically for her. Eleanor gave a slight nod, dismissing her assistant to continue her work outside. The room fell silent again, the only sound the steady ticking of the wall clock. Eleanor stared at the securely sealed envelope for a moment. An unusual feeling, a cold premonition, crept into her mind, but she quickly pushed it aside. With a steady hand, she tore open the end and pulled out its contents. It was an official document bearing the seal of the New York State Supreme Court. Eleanor read the words, line by line. It was a petition for divorce. The name of the plaintiff, printed in stark black ink, was Luke, her own husband. For several seconds, Eleanor sat frozen, staring at the legal text. Her eyes traced the grounds for the petition, a complete fabrication that painted her as a career-obsessed wife who neglected her family in pursuit of ambition. Strangely, not a single tear fell. There were no sobs of anguish, no hysterical cries of denial that Luke might have expected. Instead, Eleanor leaned back in her chair and let out a long, deep breath that felt surprisingly like relief. She had smelled the stench of betrayal in her marriage for a long time. Luke's attitude had grown colder with each passing day. His excuses for working late were nonsensical, and the faint scent of another woman's perfume often clung to his shirts when he came home. Eleanor had been quietly gathering information and knew all about Tiffany, the woman Luke had been keeping on the side. She had chosen to remain silent, not out of weakness, but because she was formulating a plan, ensuring her company was secure from her husband's grasp. She had let Luke feel like he was winning, like he was in control. He apparently thought that by filing for divorce first, he could walk away free, start a new life with Tiffany, and take half of the fortune Eleanor had built with him. That small-minded assumption made her smile, a cynical, humorless curve of her lips in the quiet of her office. Luke had gravely misjudged the woman who had supported his entire life. Eleanor's patience had reached its absolute limit. She picked up the receiver of her office phone, her fingers pressing the extension for human resources with firm, deliberate movements. There was no more time for delays or second chances. The arrival of these divorce papers was the official start of a massive cleansing of her life and her company. The call connected on the third ring. "Hello, this is Eleanor," she said, her voice as cold, sharp, and unyielding as a blade. "I need you to issue an official termination letter for Kevin, effective immediately. Clear out his office, revoke all his financial access and company privileges, and ensure he is out of this building in less than 1 hour." A sound of clear confusion came from the other end of the line. The head of HR paused, then began to ask a question cautiously, as everyone in the company knew that Kevin was the CEO's brother-in-law. He held his manager position thanks to Luke's pressure and influence years ago. But Eleanor cut him off before he could finish. "Do exactly as I have instructed, with no further questions. He is not to receive a single dollar of severance. The financial losses he has caused the company during his time as a manager are more than enough to cover any entitlements. If he refuses to leave, call security. This is my direct and final order," she added, before hanging up the phone. Meanwhile, on a lower floor, Kevin was lounging in the employee break room. He was leaning back on a plush sofa, a warm mug in his hand, his voice the loudest in the room. He was recounting his supposed brilliance on a recent project to a few new hires, who could only offer awkward, forced smiles. Kevin always boasted that he was an exemplary manager, an irreplaceable asset to the company. He felt he had absolute power in the building because his brother was married to the owner. Armed with that status, he often arrived late, left early, and casually ordered employees from other divisions to do the tasks that were his own responsibility. The other employees had always just lowered their heads and complied, too afraid of losing their jobs to challenge him. "You all need to understand, if it weren't for my input and strategy, the market expansion project last month would have been a total disaster, Kevin said. His chest puffed out with pride as he spun a lie he had told many times before. My brother, Luke, always tells me this company needs a brilliant mind like mine to keep moving forward. As he was basking in the forced admiration of the new employees, the break room door swung open. The head of HR walked in, his face tense, followed by 2 large security guards. The room, once filled with Kevin's boasting, fell into a tense, heavy silence. The other employees slowly backed away, creating a path. Kevin glared at the 3 men, annoyed that his moment of self-aggrandizement had been interrupted. What's this all about? Can't you see I'm in the middle of an important briefing with the new team members, he snapped, his tone arrogant and dismissive. The HR head ignored his condescension. He walked to the table and placed a termination letter directly in front of Kevin. Mr. Miller, as of this moment, your employment with this company is officially and unconditionally terminated. You are fired. Please pack your personal belongings and leave the premises immediately. Kevin's eyes widened in disbelief. He shot up from his seat and slammed the document back on the table with a loud crack. What is this? Are you all joking with me? Do you forget who I am? I'm Luke's brother, the husband of your boss. You have no right or authority to fire me. This is a direct order from Miss Vance, the HR head replied, his expression flat. You are also not entitled to any severance pay. Security will escort you to your desk to collect your things and ensure you leave without taking any company property. Kevin flew into a rage. He kicked a nearby chair, sending it clattering to the floor, and began shouting his brother's name repeatedly. He threatened to ruin the HR head's career. But the 2 security guards moved much faster. They grabbed both of Kevin's arms in a powerful grip. Kevin struggled, flailing and spewing a stream of curses, but his strength was no match for theirs. The other employees in the room watched in silence. Many exchanged knowing glances. Secretly thrilled and relieved that the most insufferable parasite in their office was finally being forcibly removed. Security dragged Kevin back to his office. They grabbed an empty cardboard box and began swiftly packing his personal items, ignoring the protests that continued to spill from his mouth. Kevin kept screaming that he would make Eleanor regret this and that he would have everyone who dared touch him fired. Once the box was full, they hauled Kevin towards the main exit on the ground floor. As he was dragged down the hallway, every employee he passed stared at him as if he were a common criminal. A hot, overwhelming wave of shame washed over his face, but his ego and arrogance were still greater. Outside the building, the guards placed his box on the sidewalk. Kevin straightened his rumpled clothes, his eyes filled with a vengeful glare as he looked back at the building. He immediately reached for his phone. He had to call his brother and report what had happened. He was certain Luke would fix this mess and demand that Eleanor get on her knees and apologize to him. Kevin's fingers trembled with rage as he dialed his brother's number. As soon as the call connected, he launched into a dramatic, exaggerated account of the humiliating event, twisting the facts to make himself seem like the victim of a terrible injustice. On the other end, Luke's voice boomed with anger. He felt his pride as a husband had been trampled by Eleanor. He immediately called for his mother, Helen, who was at home with him. Hearing that her youngest son had been treated so cruelly and thrown out of his job, Helen erupted in fury. She cursed Eleanor's name and insisted she and Luke go to the office immediately to teach their daughter-in-law a lesson. Less than an hour later, the car Luke was driving screeched to a halt in front of the company's lobby. Luke and Helen stormed out, their faces red with fury, and burst through the main glass doors. The receptionist who tried to stop them was shoved aside by Luke. The once orderly lobby descended into chaos, filled with the sound of their heavy footsteps and enraged shouts. Employees passing by froze in shock, watching their CEO's husband lose control in a public space. "Where is Eleanor? Get that woman down here now so she can face me," Luke bellowed, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. Helen was just as furious. She pointed a trembling finger at the reception desk, her eyes wild. "All of you, call your boss down here. Who does she think she is, throwing my son out? That ungrateful wife. Has she forgotten who raised her up all these years?" she shrieked, causing several employees to duck their heads in fear while still stealing glances. The commotion quickly reached Eleanor's assistant on the top floor. But even before her assistant could report it, Eleanor already knew. She was watching the entire scene unfold on the security monitor in her office. With a calm and fearless expression, she smoothed her blazer, picked up a document from her desk, and walked out. She descended to the ground floor with steady, measured steps. The moment Eleanor appeared, the shouting slowly died down. All eyes were now fixed on their CEO, who stood tall, radiating an aura of powerful leadership. Seeing her daughter-in-law, Helen lunged forward. But two security guards swiftly blocked the older woman, preventing her from touching their boss. Helen struggled, glaring at Eleanor with pure hatred. "You ungrateful, wicked woman. Why did you fire your high-achieving brother? Kevin is the pillar of our family. He's the one who made this company successful. How dare you humiliate your husband's family in front of all these people," she screamed, her voice piercing the air. Luke stepped forward to stand beside his mother. He puffed out his chest, trying to assert his dominance as a husband in front of all the watching employees. "Are you insane, Eleanor? What kind of decision is this? Kevin worked day and night for your projects, and you fire him without even telling me? You have no respect for me as your husband," he snarled, pointing a finger directly at Eleanor's face. Hearing the string of baseless accusations, Eleanor didn't look angry or offended. Instead, a small laugh escaped her lips. It was a quiet laugh, but it was dripping with profound contempt. Her laughter caused Luke and Helen to fall silent for a moment, confused by a reaction they had not anticipated. Eleanor stopped laughing and looked from Luke to Helen, her gaze sharp and intimidating. "High-achieving? Work day and night?" She repeated Luke's words with a mocking tone. "You two seem to be living in a fantasy of your own creation. Kevin has never contributed anything to this company except for secretly draining its budget and disrupting the workflow. And to answer your question," she paused, ensuring her voice carried across the lobby, "he isn't my family anymore. Why would I waste my own money paying a parasite in my own company?" The words, delivered so smoothly and sharply, caused the color to drain from Luke's face. Helen gasped, her chest heaving with rage at hearing her favorite son called a parasite. "You watch your mouth, Eleanor. He is your husband's brother. He is family. How dare you speak like that?" Eleanor ignored her mother-in-law's fury. She raised her right hand, which held a document, and casually opened it. "My husband? This family?" she asked rhetorically, then fixed her gaze directly on Luke. "Luke, don't pretend to be some family hero here. Wasn't it just an hour ago that a process server delivered a divorce petition from you to my desk?" Eleanor's statement was like a lightning bolt on a clear day. The employees, who had been holding their breath, began whispering amongst themselves. The fact that their CEO was being divorced by her husband suddenly explained everything about Kevin's firing. Luke was speechless, his jaw tight. He never expected Eleanor to expose their divorce so publicly, in front of hundreds of his wife's subordinates. He thought she would be in her office, crying and begging him to stay, not attacking him in the lobby. "Mom, ask your pride and joy here," Eleanor said, turning her attention to the now confused Helen. "Ask him why he sent me divorce papers. Ask him about a woman named Tiffany, who he has been supporting with the money I earned through my blood, sweat, and tears." At the mention of Tiffany's name, Luke's eyes widened. He felt he was in too deep, and his shame morphed into blind rage. He no longer cared about his image. "Enough, Eleanor. Don't you dare twist the facts. You were the one who was always busy, always neglecting me. And remember this. Since we are getting a divorce, I will make sure half of this company's assets end up in my hands. I have a right to that wealth because I am your husband," he threatened, the veins in his neck bulging. Eleanor smiled coldly at his empty threat. She turned, ready to head back to her office. Before she left, she glanced back at Luke. "Feel free to try and take it, if you can. We'll see who walks out of that courtroom with nothing but the clothes on their back. Now, get your mother out of my building, or I'll have security drag you both out to join your brother on the street." Without waiting for a reply, Eleanor walked away. Her decisiveness seemed to instantly shrink the bravado of Luke and Helen. They realized the woman they had always considered compliant had transformed into an opponent they could not defeat. The main entrance of the company stood as a witness to the beginning of the destruction of a family's pride, a family that had leached off the hard work of one woman for far too long. After the commotion in the lobby subsided, Eleanor stepped back into the executive elevator. As the steel and glass doors closed, her mind drifted back to the early days of her marriage to Luke. She had once thought he was a responsible man, a partner worthy of her. But over time, his true nature had revealed itself. Luke preferred to enjoy the fruits of Eleanor's labor rather than build a career of his own. The final straw had been when he forced her to hire Kevin for a strategic position within her company. Once in her office, Eleanor locked the door. She walked to a large landscape painting on the wall. Behind it was a steel safe that could only be opened with her fingerprint and a secret passcode. She placed her thumb on the scanner and entered a complex combination of numbers. The safe door clicked open. From inside, she removed a thick, neatly bound stack of documents. It was a comprehensive forensic audit she had secretly commissioned from an external accounting firm several months ago. Eleanor carried the stack to her desk. She flipped through the pages, each one containing irrefutable proof of Kevin's corruption during his time as a project manager. For years, Kevin had paraded himself as a star employee with a string of brilliant achievements. Luke and Helen had always used this as leverage to demand various luxuries from Eleanor. But the numbers on these pages told a completely different story. Kevin had never achieved anything. Every project he managed ended with wildly inflated costs. He had created fake supply companies, forged approval signatures, manipulated purchase orders, and inflated the price of raw materials to 3 times their actual market value. The difference was funneled directly into his personal bank account. Eleanor stared at the records of the money transfers provided by the auditors. Company funds that should have been used for business development had been spent by Kevin on nightclub tabs, designer goods, and treating his friends to make himself look like a wealthy man. Eleanor had long been aware of financial discrepancies but had chosen to remain silent, covering the losses with her own personal money out of respect for Luke as her husband. She didn't want to tarnish his family's name in front of her employees. But her patience and sacrifice had been repaid with betrayal. Luke had cheated on her and had the audacity to serve her with divorce papers. Now, there was no reason left for Eleanor to protect the reputation of that parasitic family. She powered on her laptop and connected to the internet. She opened her email client. With swift, decisive movements, she scanned the most critical pages of the audit, including the bank statements showing the illegal flow of funds into Kevin's account. She attached the digital files to an email addressed directly to Luke's personal account. For the subject line, Eleanor typed a short, deadly sentence. A one-way ticket to prison for your beloved brother. After ensuring the attachments were complete, she clicked send without a moment's hesitation. Meanwhile, at a diner not far from the office building, Luke was sitting across from Helen. He was still breathing heavily, his chest tight with the anger and humiliation he felt. Helen was chattering endlessly, cursing Eleanor with every foul word she could think of, still furious that her youngest son had been so disgracefully fired. In the midst of his mother's rant, Luke's phone buzzed with an email notification. He picked it up from the table, annoyed. His brow furrowed when he saw Eleanor's name as the sender. With a mix of irritation and the hope of finding something to use against her, Luke opened the message. As his eyes scanned the text and he opened the attached documents, his face went deathly pale. He zoomed in on his phone screen, making sure he wasn't misreading the numbers and company names listed. His heart began to pound in his chest. The documents were meticulously detailed, listing the date, time, and exact amount of company funds his brother had embezzled. The proof of the wire transfers into Kevin's account was undeniable. Luke swallowed hard. He knew his brother often asked for extra cash to party, but he never imagined Kevin would dare to steal such a staggering amount from the company. "What's wrong with you? You look like you've seen a ghost. What did that arrogant woman send you?" Helen asked, noticing the drastic change in her son's expression. Luke didn't answer right away. His hand trembled as he held the phone. He read the final paragraph of Eleanor's email, which stated that all this evidence had already been handed over to the company's legal team. If Kevin tried to contest his termination, or if Luke dared to sue for a share of the assets, Eleanor would not hesitate to report the case to the police on charges of theft and fraud. A multi-year prison sentence now loomed over Kevin. Luke realized his position was incredibly weak. All his bravado from the office lobby had crumbled. He tried to think of a defense for his brother, but the hard facts on his phone screen destroyed any possible argument. He placed the phone back on the table with a stiff, mechanical motion and rubbed his face, trying to process the legal catastrophe that had just befallen his family. The amount of money recorded in the documents was immense, far exceeding the value of anything Luke personally owned. If Eleanor took this to criminal court, he could never afford to pay the restitution to keep his brother out of jail. Growing impatient, Helen snatched the phone from the table. Though her eyesight was failing with age, she strained to read the text. When she realized the email contained accusations of financial crimes against Kevin, she slammed the phone back down. "This must be a fabrication. Eleanor made all this up to frame your brother because she's hurt that you're divorcing her. That woman is a snake. She doesn't want to share her wealth with you, so she's using these dirty tricks to scare us into backing down," Helen exclaimed, her voice trembling with a rage that clouded all reason. Luke looked at his mother with despair in his eyes. "Mom, these documents include official transaction records directly from the banking system. There's no way Eleanor could fake official bank statements. Kevin really took the money. He destroyed her company from the inside and left a clear trail. Don't be fooled by that wicked wife of yours. Kevin is a good boy. He would never do something so low. As the oldest son, you have to defend him, no matter what. Don't let Eleanor bully us and ruin our family name, Helen argued stubbornly, completely rejecting the harsh reality before her. Luke didn't argue further. His mind was a tangled mess. His plan to divorce Eleanor, claim half her fortune, and live a life of leisure was now in ruins. He felt as though the ground had split open beneath him. Instead of a mountain of wealth, he was now facing a legal threat that could send his own brother to prison whenever Eleanor decided to act. He knew his soon-to-be ex-wife wasn't bluffing. Eleanor was a woman of sharp calculation who never attacked without lethal ammunition. Amidst the panic that paralyzed his mind, Luke suddenly remembered his promise to meet Tiffany that afternoon. He rose from his seat, leaving his mother to continue her tirade, blaming Eleanor for all the misfortune that had befallen them that day. Elsewhere, Tiffany was sitting with her legs crossed on a plush sofa in the lounge of a luxury shopping center. The beautiful woman gazed at her reflection in a small compact mirror, applying a fresh coat of lipstick. A wide smile spread across her face as she imagined a pampered future. From the very beginning of her illicit affair with Luke, Tiffany had convinced herself that he was a top-tier, successful businessman with an unlimited source of wealth. Luke had never hesitated to shower her with expensive gifts, take her to romantic, wallet-draining dinners, and provide her with a satisfyingly high-class lifestyle. When Luke had called to tell her he had finally served Eleanor with divorce papers that morning, Tiffany's heart had soared. She believed the end of his marriage would give Luke full control of all his assets, allowing them to finally move forward with their relationship without having to hide. A short while later, Luke appeared at the main entrance. He walked with a heavy gait, his face etched with exhaustion. But Tiffany, blinded by her greedy daydreams, was oblivious to his mood. She stood and rushed to him, linking her arm through his in a cloying, possessive way. She rested her head on his shoulder, unconcerned with the judging glances of other shoppers. "Darling, you took so long today. I was getting so bored waiting for you," she cooed, looking up at him with hopeful, sparkling eyes. "How did it all go? You threw those papers right in her face, didn't you? That arrogant woman must have been on her knees, crying and begging you not to leave her." Luke forced a smile that felt stiff and cold. He didn't want to ruin Tiffany's mood. And he wasn't ready to recount the humiliating disaster in Eleanor's lobby, or the terrifying threat he'd received on his phone. His pride, the very image of the powerful man Tiffany adored, was too great to admit he had just been thoroughly crushed. "It's all taken care of. It went smoothly. You don't have to worry about it anymore. From now on, we can just focus on our future together," he replied, his voice strained as he tried to hide the storm of panic raging inside him. Hearing this, Tiffany's face lit up with a false sense of victory. "Well, in that case, we have to celebrate. I was just browsing in that designer boutique over there. There's a handbag from the new season that is absolutely stunning. It would look perfect on me when we go on vacation. Let's go right now. I'm dying to take it home," she exclaimed, pulling Luke's arm towards the row of exclusive shops displaying astronomically priced goods. Luke could only follow, a sense of dread growing in his gut. Inside his chaotic mind, he tried to calculate the remaining credit limit on the cards in his wallet. He clung to the false hope that his primary card, the one he always relied on, would still have enough of a limit to buy Tiffany a luxury item or two and save face for the day. Inside the boutique, Tiffany moved quickly, her eyes scanning the displays. She pointed to a medium-sized handbag with a gleaming metal clasp and paired it with a set of high heels that cost as much as one of his brother's former employees made in a year. A sales associate served them with impeccable politeness, carrying Tiffany's selections to the register with a professional smile. Tiffany stood beside the counter, her posture radiating smug satisfaction, feeling on top of the world. Luke stepped forward to pay, pulling a platinum credit card from his leather wallet. He handed it to the cashier with the casual air of a man of immense wealth. The cashier accepted it, swiped it through the machine, and politely asked Luke to enter his PIN. Luke quickly typed in the numbers and waited for the receipt to print. But instead of a crisp slip of paper, the machine emitted a loud, jarring beep. The small screen displayed a transaction denied message. The cashier frowned, removed the card, and wiped the magnetic strip with a soft cloth. "I do apologize, sir. It seems there might be a connection issue or perhaps a problem with the card reader. May I try it one more time?" Luke nodded curtly, a wave of discomfort creeping up his neck as he felt Tiffany's questioning gaze on him. The cashier inserted the card again, and Luke re-entered his PIN, a sliver of doubt now in his mind. The machine processed for a few seconds that felt like an eternity. Once again, the same shrill beep filled the quiet corner of the store. The screen again showed that the transaction could not be processed. The cashier's expression turned tense and awkward. "My deepest apologies, sir, but your card has been declined again by the banking system." The note on our screen indicates that transaction access for this card was forcibly frozen by the primary account holder earlier today. "Would you perhaps like to try another card or pay with cash?" he asked. His voice low, but perfectly clear to Tiffany, who was standing right next to Luke. Hearing the cashier's explanation, Luke's face flushed with a mortifying, suffocating shame. He snatched the card back from the cashier's hand. Beads of cold sweat formed on his forehead. It was only in this moment that he realized a crushing truth that had completely escaped his shallow thinking. The high-limit credit card he had so freely used to fund his lavish lifestyle and spoil Tiffany was a supplementary card linked directly to Eleanor's primary corporate account. For years, Eleanor had let him use it without question. But today, immediately after he had so arrogantly challenged her with a divorce, she had moved with surgical precision to sever every single financial lifeline he had. "Just hold the items for a moment. This must be a system error from the bank." "I'll just use another card," Luke stammered, his voice trembling with panic. He fumbled through his wallet, pulled out a backup card, and handed it to the cashier with a shaking hand. The same humiliating scene repeated itself. The machine shrieked its refusal, the screen displaying the same merciless message. "Account frozen." Luke frantically searched his wallet, trying a third card, but the result was the same. Every one of his financial sources had been cut off. Tiffany, who had been watching in silence, was now losing her patience. Her cheerful expression had hardened into a mask of bitter disappointment. Her own pride was being shredded as she watched the man she'd boasted about appear so helpless and pathetic in front of a store clerk. "What is going on, Luke? Why isn't a single one of your cards working? You always go on about how rich you are, but you can't even pay for a few small things? Are you trying to humiliate me in front of all these people?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "Darling, please, just calm down. It must be a temporary technical issue. I promise I'll call the bank and get this sorted out immediately. How about we just postpone the shopping for today? We'll come back tomorrow and buy everything," Luke pleaded, reaching for her wrist to guide her out of the store. But Tiffany yanked her arm away. The shame boiling inside her had reached its limit. "Tomorrow? You want me to just leave the things I've already picked out? You heard what the cashier said. Your access was frozen by the primary owner. Don't you dare tell me that all the money you've been spending on me came from your wife's pocket. You can't even make your own money, can you?" she shrieked, all pretense of decorum gone. Her shrill voice echoed through the boutique, causing other wealthy patrons to turn and stare. Luke felt as though he had been stripped naked in public. He grabbed Tiffany's arm and dragged her out of the store, half running to escape the judgmental eyes. As they moved through the opulent mall, Tiffany continued to rant and struggle against his grip. When they reached a deserted section of the parking garage, she finally wrenched her arm free. She stood before him, her eyes burning with disgust and rage. "You are a pathetic liar. You promised me a life of endless luxury after you got rid of your wife. But the reality is you're just a useless man who leeches off a woman's success. If you don't have a penny to your name, why have I been wasting my precious time with you?" she yelled, her chest heaving with emotion. Luke desperately tried to calm her, making empty promises that he would get his half of the company's assets after the divorce was finalized. He begged her to be patient and stand by him. But Tiffany was not the type of woman to bet her future on empty words. She scoffed, turned her back on him, and walked away without a second glance, leaving Luke standing alone under the harsh glare of the parking garage lights. He could only watch as her figure grew smaller and disappeared. His dream of a new, happy life with the woman of his dreams had been shattered in a matter of hours. It was only at this lowest point that Luke finally understood that without Eleanor supporting him from behind the scenes, he was absolutely nothing. He was just an empty shell who had lived for years in the shadow of his wife's success. And now, that protective shadow had been pulled away, leaving him to be burned by the painful reality of his own inadequacy. The sun beat down as Luke drove away from the shopping center, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel, channeling all his frustration and shattered pride into the motion. Tiffany's rejection echoed in his ears like a broken record. He sped through the streets, ignoring traffic signs and the angry honks of other drivers. His only goal was to get back to his lavish home, cool his head, and plan his legal revenge against Eleanor. He was certain that the luxurious house he shared with her was marital property and could not be taken from him. But the scene that greeted him as he turned onto the street of his upscale neighborhood was far from what he expected. In the distance, he saw a small crowd gathered in front of the tall iron gate of his home. His car slowed to a crawl. His heart hammered against his ribs as he saw piles of large suitcases, dozens of cardboard boxes, and various personal belongings belonging to him, his mother, and his brother, all dumped unceremoniously on the sidewalk outside the gate. Beside the pile of belongings, Helen stood with a red, tear-streaked face, screaming and pointing at several large men in dark suits who were guarding the locked gate. Luke slammed the car into park, jumped out, and ran toward his mother, who looked completely unhinged. "Mom, what's happening? Why is all our stuff out on the street?" he asked, breathless, staring at the chaotic mess of their lives displayed for all the neighbors to see. Helen grabbed his arm, tears of rage streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. "Luke, you're finally here. Look what that wicked wife of yours has done. She sent these thugs to throw me out of my own son's house. They forced all of our things out, Kevin's things too, with no mercy. You have to do something, Luke. Get them off our property right now," she shrieked hysterically. Hearing this, Luke's anger boiled over again. He puffed out his chest and strode toward the gate, ready to confront one of the guards. But before he could, a middle-aged man in a sharp, impeccably tailored suit stepped forward from behind the guards. He was the head of Eleanor's corporate legal team. He looked at Luke with a calm, flat expression and opened a thick folder. "Good afternoon, Mr. Miller. I am here on the official orders of my client, Miss Vance. As of this moment, you and all members of your family are strictly forbidden from setting foot on this property. All personal belongings of Helen Miller, Kevin Miller, and yourself have been carefully packed and placed outside the property line," the lawyer stated, his tone professional and detached. Luke let out a hollow, forced laugh. "What kind of lawyer are you? Don't you know the law? This is the house I live in with my wife. This building is a marital asset acquired during our marriage. You have no authority to evict me, the legal husband. I can sue you for this," he threatened, the veins in his neck popping. The lawyer remained unfazed. "I'm afraid your understanding of the law is quite shallow, Mr. Miller. Please observe this document carefully. It is the deed and title to this property. This house is not marital property. It was purchased by, and is legally registered under Miss Vance's corporation, long before you and my client were married. Since you have just filed for divorce and no longer have any ties to the company, you have completely lost your right to use this company asset." The lawyer's explanation hit Luke like a sledgehammer. His gaze went vacant as he stared at the legal text and official seals on the document. His mind flashed back. He remembered Eleanor handling the purchase of the house as a corporate investment. At the time, he had been too busy with his own pleasures to care about the details, always assuming his wife's money was also his. Now, that carelessness had become a blade at his own throat. Helen, who had overheard, refused to accept it. She lunged at the gate, beating her fists against the iron bars. "Lies. You're all working together to trick us. Luke is Eleanor's husband. Whatever belongs to her automatically belongs to my son. Open this gate. I refuse to leave this palace," she wailed, her pathetic cries attracting the attention of neighbors peering from behind their curtains. In the midst of this humiliating scene, a sleek, black town car pulled up across the street. The tinted rear window glided down, revealing Eleanor's calm, elegant face. She looked at her former mother-in-law weeping on the sidewalk and at Luke, standing frozen and powerless. Her expression held not a trace of pity. There was no explosive vengeance, only a coldness that seemed to freeze the air. "Helen, stop making a scene and demeaning yourself in front of my house," Eleanor said, her voice quiet but firm. Luke and Helen both turned toward the car. Helen's eyes blazed. "Eleanor, you heartless monster. How dare you treat me this way, after all the kindness I've shown you?" "What kindness are you referring to, Helen?" Eleanor replied with a slight, piercing smile. "Was it the kindness of you insulting my cooking every morning? Or the kindness of you demanding I buy you expensive jewelry every month with the money I work day and night to earn? This is no longer a palace for parasites. This is a home I bought with my own hard work. Now take your precious son and get out of my sight. Learn to live on your own 2 feet without feeding on someone else." After delivering her final words, Eleanor signaled to her driver. The window slid up, and the car moved smoothly through the now opening gates, leaving Luke and Helen with their ruin on the side of the road. The towering iron gates closed behind the car with a heavy, final thud, locking them out of the life of luxury they had taken for granted. With no other choice, his body aching with defeat and humiliation, Luke began hauling the heavy boxes and suitcases into his car. Helen sobbed uncontrollably the entire time, lamenting her fate and cursing Eleanor without end. By nightfall, with all his funds cut off, the best Luke could do was find a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city. The room had thin walls, a hard mattress, and a rattling old fan. Helen sat on the worn-out bed, clutching a pillow, mourning the catastrophic fall from grace she had experienced in less than 24 hours. In a corner of the cramped room, Luke sat with his head in his hands, realizing that the dirty game he had started to get rid of Eleanor had just buried him alive in a pit of poverty. That first night in the motel was endless torment. Kevin, who had been hiding all day, terrified of being arrested, finally showed up, his face pale and his body trembling. The tiny room was now filled with the oppressive aura of 3 desperate people. Kevin paced frantically, rambling about the prison threat from Eleanor and demanding Luke find a way out, hire a lawyer, pay back the money. But Luke could only shout at him to be quiet, as he himself had no way out of their financial ruin. The next morning, after a sleepless night, Luke's mind was once again filled with a reckless plan. His pride and ambition blinded his common sense. He needed a large sum of cash, fast. He needed it to hire a top-tier lawyer for the divorce settlement, to keep his brother out of jail, and most importantly, to prove to Tiffany that he wasn't a broke loser. In his desperation, Luke made the most fatal decision of his life. He took Kevin to meet a loan shark operating in the city's criminal underworld, a man known for his brutal collection methods. They arrived at a nondescript building guarded by menacing-looking men. With a forced air of his former arrogance, Luke sat across from the lender. He explained he was divorcing a wealthy CEO, and promised a massive return on the loan once he won his share of the assets in court, even offering his car title as initial collateral. The shrewd lender just smiled, seeing the desperation in Luke's eyes. He pushed a stack of papers across the table, the terms detailing a neck-breaking daily interest rate. Blinded by the need for instant cash, Luke and Kevin signed without reading the fine print. They walked out with a thick wad of cash, feeling a momentary sense of relief, completely unaware that they had just tightened a noose around their own necks. While the 2 brothers celebrated what they thought was a solution, Eleanor was having a productive and elegant day. Her company was running more smoothly than ever now that the parasite had been removed. That afternoon, she had a lunch meeting with an important client at a Michelin-starred restaurant in the heart of the city. She looked impeccable in a tailored power suit, exuding an intelligence and authority that commanded respect. After her meeting concluded, Eleanor decided to stay and enjoy her dessert. By chance, her eyes caught a familiar sight at a nearby table. It was Tiffany, sitting alone, enjoying an expensive meal, her legs crossed in a way she probably thought was captivating. For a moment, Eleanor considered ignoring her. But her brilliant mind quickly formulated a small strategy. It was too good an opportunity to pass up if she wanted to completely demolish Luke's world from every possible angle. With calm, measured steps, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor, Eleanor approached Tiffany's table. Tiffany, who was engrossed in her phone, looked up as a shadow fell over her. Her smile vanished instantly, replaced by a hostile glare as she recognized Eleanor. She straightened her posture, trying to project a false confidence. "What do you want? If you're here to make a scene and beg me to give Luke back, you're talking to the wrong person. He chose me," she said, her voice raised slightly, trying to attract the attention of other diners. Eleanor was unfazed. She pulled out the chair opposite Tiffany and sat down with graceful composure, ignoring the woman's animosity. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze fixed on Tiffany's eyes with a calm, unnerving smile. "Beg you to give Luke back?" she repeated softly. "You certainly have an admirable level of self-confidence, Tiffany." "Actually, I came here to thank you." Tiffany's brow furrowed, confused. She had been prepared for a shouting match, but Eleanor's calm demeanor was unsettling. "Thank me for what?" "Don't play games with me," she snapped. "Thank you for voluntarily taking out the trash I've been wanting to get rid of for a very long time," Eleanor replied, her voice quiet but razor-sharp. "I just feel a little sorry for you, sitting here all alone. Luke must have promised you the world. He's very good with sweet words. But as one woman to another, I feel obligated to give you a piece of information so you don't waste your youth in vain." Tiffany swallowed, a bad feeling creeping over her as she remembered the declined credit cards. "What are you talking about? Luke is going to win his settlement and share all your wealth with me. Don't try to scare me just because you're afraid of being poor." Eleanor laughed softly. "My wealth? What wealth are you referring to, Tiffany? Haven't you realized the truth yet? The house, the cars, the money Luke has been flaunting were all assets of my company. Our prenuptial agreement makes that very clear. Luke has nothing to his name. If you're with him hoping he'll be a rich man after this divorce, then listen to me very carefully. Right now, the man you adore is racking up debt with high-interest loan sharks just to maintain his lifestyle. Tiffany's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. You're lying. You're just jealous. Prove it to yourself. Ask him to buy you something expensive today without using the cash he borrowed, which will run out soon. If you insist on staying with him for financial security, you might as well be embracing a tombstone. That man has no future except a mountain of debt and the legal threat hanging over his brother. Enjoy the time you have left with him before the debt collectors start knocking on your door, too. After delivering that final, lethal whisper, Eleanor stood, smoothed her suit, and walked out of the restaurant with unshakable grace. Behind her, Tiffany sat frozen, her face ashen. Her appetite was gone. Eleanor's convincing words had shattered the last of her faith in Luke's promises. The seed of doubt planted the day before had now grown into full-blown panic. Tiffany knew she had to make a plan to escape before she was dragged down with a man who, it turned out, had nothing at all. Eleanor's warning had worked perfectly, severing the last chain that tied Luke to the only thing he had left. The day of the hearing finally arrived. Luke stepped out of his car with his chest puffed out and his chin held high. With the cash from the loan shark, he had managed to hire a reputable lawyer and buy a new suit to project an image of lingering wealth and dignity. Behind him, Kevin followed with an equally arrogant stride, hoping to celebrate his brother's victory and get a cut of the spoils to solve his own legal troubles. Soon, a luxurious black car pulled up to the courthouse steps. The door opened and Eleanor emerged. The picture of elegance in a sharp, tailored suit, radiating the unshakable aura of a CEO. She was flanked by her lead counsel, who carried a briefcase full of documents. When Eleanor's party passed Luke in the hallway, he shot her a condescending smirk. She didn't even glance his way, looking straight ahead as if he were nothing more than a statue. Inside the courtroom, after the initial proceedings, Luke's lawyer stood and began his argument. He painted Eleanor as an ambitious, neglectful wife and demanded a 50% split of all assets, including company shares, the house, and all vehicles acquired during the marriage. Luke leaned back, confident of his victory. But when it was Eleanor's lawyer's turn, he calmly rose and presented his first piece of evidence. The ironclad prenuptial agreement, signed by Luke years ago, which stated that all of Eleanor's business assets and income were her sole and separate property, untouchable in the event of a divorce. Luke stared in shock. He vaguely remembered signing some papers years ago when he was still trying to win Eleanor over, pretending not to care about her money. That past foolishness had just slapped him across the face. Before he could recover, Eleanor's lawyer launched his second, more devastating attack. He produced a thick binder of evidence. Bank statements showing regular, large payments from Luke's accounts to Tiffany, dozens of photos of Luke and Tiffany together in public, and hotel booking confirmations in both their names. He laid out a clear case that the marriage had failed not due to Eleanor's neglect, but due to Luke's blatant infidelity, funded entirely by his wife. The courtroom was silent. The judge examined the evidence. Luke's lawyer, who had been so bombastic moments before, now sat in stunned silence. Luke broke into a cold sweat, his body feeling weak and boneless. He looked at Eleanor, who met his gaze with a cold, flat expression, solidifying her position as the absolute victor. After a short deliberation, the judge struck his gavel. Luke's petition for a share of the assets was denied in its entirety. He would receive nothing. The hearing was over. Eleanor stood, shook her lawyer's hand, and walked out with her head held high. In the hallway, Kevin rushed forward, expecting good news. Instead, he saw his brother emerge, looking like a ghost. Before he could ask what happened, 3 police officers appeared and surrounded him. They presented a warrant for his arrest. An officer explained that he was the primary suspect in a case of corporate embezzlement and financial fraud, based on the evidence submitted by Eleanor's company. Kevin panicked, screaming his brother's name, begging Luke to use his winnings to post bail. He struggled as they cuffed him, but Luke could do nothing. He stood frozen, watching his brother get arrested, without a single dollar to his name to help him. From a distance, Eleanor paused to watch the downfall of the 2 parasitic brothers with a look of quiet satisfaction. The punishment they deserved had finally arrived. Back at the motel, Helen and Tiffany waited anxiously. Helen was already planning how she would spend her new fortune. Tiffany was simply waiting to see if Luke was now a rich man or if she needed to enact her escape plan. Late in the afternoon, the door creaked open and Luke stumbled in, his suit rumpled, his eyes hollow with despair. He collapsed onto the floor. Helen rushed to him, her face alight with excitement. "How did it go, Luke? Did you put that arrogant woman in her place? When do we get our money? Where's Kevin?" Luke looked up slowly, his gaze empty. It's over, Mom. We lost everything. She had a prenup. It blocked all our claims. And Kevin. He was arrested right after the hearing. Eleanor really sent him to jail for the embezzlement. The news hit Helen like a physical blow. She staggered backward, her eyes wide with disbelief. She began screaming, beating her fists against Luke's chest, blaming him for not protecting his brother. In the midst of the chaos, Tiffany realized her worst fears were true. Luke was completely ruined. Carefully, so as not to draw attention, she sidled over to a small table where Helen's purse lay half open. Inside, she saw a velvet box containing the last of Helen's jewelry. Without a second thought, Tiffany snatched the box, slipped it into her own bag, and crept out of the room, leaving the family to their destruction. Moments later, the motel room door was kicked open. 4 large, menacing men, the loan sharks collectors, stormed in. They had heard about Luke's loss in court and were there to collect, with interest. "Where's our boss's money, Luke?" the lead collector snarled, grabbing him by the collar and lifting him off the ground. Luke begged for more time, but they had no mercy. They threw him against the wall. Helen, seeing her son's life in danger, scrambled to offer her jewelry box as collateral, only to find it gone. She realized Tiffany had vanished with the last valuable thing they owned, and the shock nearly made her faint. Enraged, the collectors tore the room apart, taking Luke's phone, watch, and anything of value, giving him a final deadline of the next morning before they returned to inflict more serious pain. After they left, Helen's pride finally shattered. She knew their only hope was mercy from the woman they had wronged. Disregarding her shame, she ran out, took the cheapest bus she could find, and went to Eleanor's company. She arrived at the lobby looking disheveled and desperate. Just as Eleanor was leaving the building, Helen ran to her and fell to her knees on the cold marble floor, clutching the hem of Eleanor's pants. "Eleanor, please help us. I beg you, I was wrong. Go back to Luke, get Kevin out of jail, pay off Luke's debts. His life is in danger. I'll be a good mother-in-law, I promise. Please, save our family," she sobbed. The lobby fell silent. But Eleanor, standing above the weeping woman, showed no change in expression. Her face was a mask of cold resolve. "I'm sorry, Helen, but this company does not make charitable donations to strangers, especially not to those who tried to destroy my life from within. Your actions have consequences, and you must bear them alone. Never come to this building again, or I will have security remove you," she said, her voice freezing. She pulled her leg free and walked out, leaving Helen wailing on the floor, with no one to help her. The days that followed were a living nightmare. In prison, police searching Kevin's belongings found several small bags of illegal drugs. His charges escalated from white-collar crime to a serious felony drug possession, promising a much longer sentence. He withered in his cell, a shadow of his former self. Luke and Helen, meanwhile, fled the motel in the dead of night. They lived on the run, moving between homeless shelters and cheap boarding houses, always looking over their shoulders for the loan sharks men. Luke, the man who once looked down on everyone, now worked as a day laborer at a wholesale market, hauling heavy sacks for a pittance, just enough to feed his mother, who was growing sicker by the day from stress and despair. One dreary morning, Eleanor drove to the police station where Kevin was being held. She was led to a visitor's room. When Kevin was brought in, he was a horrifying sight, thin, bruised, and broken. The moment he saw Eleanor, looking poised and powerful, he fell to the floor and crawled towards the bars separating them, weeping like a lost child. "Eleanor, please, help me. Drop the charges. Get me out of this hell. They torture me every day. Tell them the drugs aren't mine. I'll be your servant for life, I'll work for free, just get me out," he begged, his voice a hoarse, desperate rasp. Eleanor watched him without a flicker of pity. "I didn't come here to listen to your empty promises, Kevin. I came to see the final result of the arrogance you and your brother were so proud of. You thought my kindness was a weakness to be exploited forever. You fed on my hard work while stabbing me in the back. We were wrong, we were blind. But we're family, Eleanor. Families are supposed to forgive." The word family lost its meaning the day your brother brought that gold digger into our lives, and the day you stole my hard-earned money to buy drugs. You are not my family. You are parasites that had to be cut away so the tree could grow strong. Enjoy the rest of your life behind these bars. This is the price you pay for your lies and betrayal. With that, Eleanor stood and walked out, ignoring Kevin's agonizing screams. Unbeknownst to her, Luke was hiding across the street, having come to check on his brother, but too cowardly to go inside. He watched Eleanor emerge from the building, looking more radiant and powerful than ever. He saw his own reflection in a dirty puddle on the street, a gaunt, haggard man in tattered clothes. In that painful moment, the full weight of his regret crashed down upon him. He had thrown away a diamond for a poisonous stone. He fell to his knees on the filthy ground, weeping silently for the life, the family, and the kingdom he himself had destroyed. 1 year later, the wheels of fate had turned completely. Eleanor's company was more successful than ever, expanding internationally. She stood on the stage at a prestigious awards gala, accepting the CEO of the Year award. Dazzling under the spotlights, she gave her acceptance speech. At that very same moment, in a filthy, sprawling wholesale market, Luke was hauling a heavy sack of potatoes on his back, his body aching with exhaustion. He was a day laborer, his life a grim cycle of back-breaking work and constant fear. His mother, Helen, lived alone in a tiny, squalid room, her health failing, consumed by a regret so deep it was a physical illness. After his shift, Luke sat in a greasy spoon diner, a cheap plate of food in front of him. A small television in the corner was broadcasting the awards gala. He paid it no mind until he heard a familiar voice, calm, confident, and powerful. He looked up. There on the screen was Eleanor, radiant and revered. He listened, mesmerized, as she spoke. "Many people have asked me the secret to my company's success this past year," Eleanor said, her eyes looking directly into the camera, as if speaking to him. "The answer is simple. The greatest failure in life is to keep holding on to people who do not know the meaning of gratitude. When you have the courage to cut away the parasites that drain your energy and your wealth, you give yourself the space to grow into something strong and unbeatable. The key to success is to cleanse your life of betrayal." Hearing those words, Luke's defenses crumbled. The fork fell from his hand. He covered his face with his rough, calloused hands. In the noisy, dim-lit diner, he wept. A broken man mourning the monumental foolishness that had cost him everything. On the screen, the sound of thunderous applause filled the air, a soundtrack to Eleanor's victory, and to a justice that was, in the end, absolute.